Elizabeth Caldwell, the Reverend Doctor, also known as Lib, and she is one of our award winners this year, should we have had an assembly, for the Award for Excellence in Theological Education. Professor Emerita of McCormick Theological Seminary, now visiting professor, teaching even now, I think.
Yeah, starting August.
At Vanderbilt Divinity, and I'm just glad for you to be here. I'm Lee Henson Hasty. I'm the Senior Director of Theological Education Funds Development at the Presbyterian Foundation, working with the Committee on Theological Education, and it's an honor to gather here with you. Last week, we had a wonderful conversation with our other awardee, Daryl Gooder, and glad to have you here today, Lib, and around in that special place with Daisy by your side. You're not alone, your dog, right? And just thanks for being here. Maybe you can just say hello. We'll see who is gathering with us.
Hi, everyone.
I'm going to try to pull that up so I see what is going on in the feed there. Here we go. It looks like Deborah Mullen, I may have just seen, let's see here if I can get this so I can see a little bit going on here. And we are here to talk about when kids ask hard questions. Rebecca Mazzoli, who's a Presbyterian minister, Martha Shroud Brown, hello, glad to have you, and I'm sure others. If you have questions, or you have questions that kids ask that have been hard, put those in our comments. We'll try to get that into the conversation today, and just glad to have you here. As I said before, Lib has taught for many years at McCormick Theological Seminary. She didn't see that call coming. She was serving as a Christian educator, and still, I think, working on your master's degree at PSCE, at Presbyterian School of Christian Education. Is that right?
Well, by that time, I was working on one at Vanderbilt.
At Vanderbilt, okay. And went on to do her PhD at Northwestern with Garrett Theological Seminary on Mysterious Mantle, the biography of Huldah Niebuhr. And I have heard quoted, actually, a guest a few weeks ago, who you know, friend Jose Irizarry, was quoting you quoting Huldah Niebuhr, so kind of brings everything full circle. Also a graduate of Presbyterian School in Memphis, where she grew up, Rhodes College, has been very active in a variety of ways in religious education, and most recently, we'll put a link to more information in her bio in the comments, but most recently, as a readability editor with the Common English Bible, which I know my cohort of ministers, preachers, we just love. Ted Hebert, one of your colleagues who worked on it as well, turned us onto it, and it's just it's a wonderful translation, and the most recent complete translation from the original languages. So thanks for everything you've done and more, Lib, and thanks for being here. Maybe to start out, you could share a little bit about your call. Often folks know, and I share with you, I would ask something about what is making you come alive, because as Howard Thurman said, what we need is people who are coming alive, or as I think probably a friend of yours, or at least acquaintance, Katie Cannon, would say, what is the work your soul has needed to have or continues to need to have?
Yeah, great. Those are all great quotes. One of my favorite authors is Gail Godwin, and I was reading her book, The Finishing School, and in that there's a story about an older woman and a teenage girl, and the older woman tells the teenage girl, there are all kinds of people, and you can look at a person and you can just tell by looking at them whether they have congealed into their final selves. It might be a very nice self, but you know, you can expect no more surprises. And then she tells her at the end, she said, you must be constantly on your guard against congealing or gelling too soon. So what brings me joy? What voices do I listen to? What must my soul have? And my soul must have space for creativity. I never planned my life. I just kind of happened into religious education because I loved biblical study at Rhodes College. Just all of a sudden, I learned about 8th century prophets. I
Wow.
never, how in youth ministry, at least at my church, all of a sudden the Old Testament drops out when you get to be a youth and it's all about Jesus all the time. And God knows we love Jesus, right?
Amen.
Amen. But the Old Testament just literally drops out, and you get all the Pauline quotes. I mean, I have a memory bank because I grew up in a conservative church, a memory bank of all those verses I was required to remember. I get to an 8th century prophets class at what was then Southwestern at Memphis, and all of a sudden, wow, I've never read these people. I've never read about what Micah says. I've never met Hosea, Isaiah, all that. And so I fell into this love of text. And then I thought, well, what do I want to do with my life? Well, I don't know, but Christian education seemed like a good choice. And I did a year at PSCE, and I came back and did youth ministry. And then you just kind of keep on going. And then I had a wonderful chance in Florence and Sheffield, Alabama for 11 years to work with 3 churches. And so back to the original question, what must I have? No day was the same. So for me, if I'm not going to gel, then I need to be creative. I need to never do the same thing twice. I need to have each day is different. And that's what I did for 11 years. And then all of a sudden somebody found me in a small church in Sheffield, Alabama, and called me. And
I think God found you.
I think God found me. I mean, I'm just minding my own business in my smallest church, where on Wednesdays I got to go to lunch with Tempe Neff, who was the 82-year-old church librarian, former school teacher. And that was what we did every Wednesday. And all of a sudden the phone rings and it's Tom Parker from McCormick saying, we have a position. I said, well, I don't have an advanced degree yet. I'm still working on my master's. And he said, oh, it's okay. Come talk to us. I said, well, heck, I have nothing to lose. And I walked in for the interview thinking, oh, this is just, nothing's going to happen here.
Right.
Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza was lecturing. And I walked in and nobody noticed me. And I just went in and there was no room. So I sat on the floor and I sat there. I'd been reading her book.
Wow.
And she was
Bread Not Stone, or what were you reading? Do you remember?
Yeah. I can't remember which one I was reading at the time. I just knew the name and I'd been reading her. I mean, because, you have to keep up when you live in a small town in Alabama. And Christian Century was one of my lifelines. And I read and I kept up, and there she was in person. And
wow.
So the interview went well, and I thought, well, this was nice, but they'll never hire me. And Jack Stotts called me in 24 hours and they offered me a job. And then they said, it's a strange contract, but we'll give you a contract. But after 2 years of teaching, then you must start a doctorate, because Bob Worley, who was the only other person I knew at McCormick, said, as a woman in the field of religious education, you must have this degree. You must. And so that's what I did. So 30 years of teaching at McCormick, back to not gelling and being creative and never having to do the same thing twice, and being able to create a syllabus like Hulda Niebuhr, Jose was talking about a few weeks ago. And I loved that. I loved that because he quoted her poem, The Warm Little Frictions of Home. If you can only imagine what little frictions of home there were in the Niebuhr family, they're just a few. And I won't even go into that. But she wrote a letter once and she said, I am not talking out of notebooks. I am not talking out of yellowed pages. I'm talking about her own teaching with the students at McCormick. Because I've come to years of experience and knowledge. And so I never wanted to speak from yellowed pages out of a notebook, but that every class I taught would be, what new book am I going to use? Because I had to use a new book every time I taught a class because I have to be fresh. So long answer.
It's beautiful. And I think it's encouraging. I mean, that is affirmed in our baptism, right? But it's something that continues, and I feel like it's so important. That question, it's been important for me too. My doctor of ministry work at McCormick was along these lines. God is sort of never done with us. And how can I help you profess Jesus Christ as Lord today, and tomorrow? And your ministry does that, I know.
There's this great book. If y'all haven't seen this book called Callings by Kathleen Callahan and Bonnie Miller McLemore, calling on Christian vocation throughout life's seasons. And what I love about the book is that everybody has a call, and exactly right what you were talking about. It's your baptism, and children, teenagers, young adults, middle-aged, and if we live out our baptism, which is, of course, as we believe, is never complete until we take our last breath and we mark on our forehead, your baptism is complete. But until then, we're always living out our call. So it's not that when you retire that you stop, but you find a new call, a new way, a new way to be involved in the justice work and the hard work and the ministry.
Well, and it starts with good questions, right? And that's part of why we're here. And so when those kids are asking those questions that may be hard, may be difficult, that actually is probably a gift from God too, right? It's an opportunity to share. So when kids ask those questions like, well, where is God? Or how do I talk to God? Or, my daughter is like, is there a God? Really? How do you know there is a God? When they ask those questions, that's an opportunity, not just in the church building, which we aren't now, right? And a lot of your ministry has been how to make the household a home for faith. That's an opportunity for parents and families to really grow as Christian people, as people of faith. So what do you do when people, or what do you say to folks when the kids are asking those hard questions?
Well, first of all, take a breath.
Right.
I wrote in Making a Home for Faith, and it's so funny that I was, asking parents to be the faith educators that we know they can be, and now they have to be. Right. And now they have to be, because unless they just want to, have their kids on a screen all the time, they are the faith educators, and I think parents are wearing out because I don't think they know how to do that. But back to questions. I think about the questions that leave us speechless. And so if they leave you speechless, that means you haven't thought about it yourself. So where does God live? So I'd almost like to reframe the question instead of when kids ask hard questions, what about when adults don't?
Oh, wow.
What about when adults don't ask hard questions? And so then if they don't ask the questions themselves, then how can they answer it for their child if they've never thought about? So where does God live is a great question, and you answer it very differently, or you think about it very differently, let's say with a 3-year-old, than you do with your daughter is how old?
14, right.
14. So you think about developmentally where they are, and 3-year-olds have that wonderful mystery and awe of God, and God can be so, so, so big. And then things get narrowed as they enter elementary school, and there's more black and white and concrete. And then you get to be a teenager and adolescence. All of a sudden, you've got analytical thinking, and it opens right. It gets that big. And God bless those questions, and that's what confirmation should be.
Right.
Asking their questions and struggling with them. And the confirmation people should be those people who are okay with questions, because it might not be black and white answers. It might be saying, well, what do you think? To quote one more of my icons, personal icons, Sarah Little.
Oh, yes.
That's why I went to PSC, was to study with Sarah Little, which I did. And I remember Jack Stotts and I was president of McCormick when I went, and then went on to Austin. We were at the same conference, and she was teaching. He said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to hear Sarah. He said, well, I am too. Well, let's go together. So, people would, and here she was at the end of her career, and they were throwing out their questions, and she would look at them and she would say, well, I have some thoughts about that, but what about you?
What about you?
And she would just stop, and she refused to be the answer giver.
Beautiful.
She could. So with parents with difficult questions, you stop and you pause. You don't let it just throw you, but you say, well, let's wonder about this together. And maybe, and I started writing about that because it was the Bible questions, But now with the culture in which we're living, you think about the questions that they might ask. Well, why did that happen, to Breonna? Right. Why did that happen to George Floyd? The hard questions, because they're not protected from what's
right.
on the news. And then you've got to think about, well, what do I really think about race? what am I doing? What am I teaching? What am I reading with my children? So I think the hard questions force us to think about what we really think about these things. And if you've never thought about why there are two creation stories, for example, or why Genesis 11, 1-9, the story of the Tower of Babel, in the new translation that you mentioned in the Common English Bible by Ted Hebert, why that difference is no longer a punishment, but part of God's big plan. How do you well, if God intended us to live together, why can't we? Would be a kid's question. Why is it so hard?
That's beautiful. By the way, I wanted to let you know that Catherine Handy Smith, Hunter Farrell, Laura Mendenhall, Carol Warheim, Ville-Marie Citron-Alvieri, one of our co-moderators, is with us. Hello. And we have a question from one of the pastors, Rebecca, who is saying along these lines, how do you invite those parents especially to be that kind of, I'll say, non-anxious presence and willing to ask those? How do you invite them or orient them into that kind of way of living? Do you have any encouragement there? How pastors can help? Because there are a lot of pastors who are watching.
Sure.
And other church leaders.
So I think one of the things you can help parents learn to do, whether you're a pastor or an educator, is just some very basic things. For one is help them listen to their child. And what is the child really asking? So are they asking for information? Sometimes there is information they're asking for, but sometimes there is their question, is it an analytical, the why questions? Or is it a question that grows out of a particular experience that happens to them, and then they ask you? I mean, one time we were in D.C. at a museum, and with my sister and her boys and my nephews, and the oldest saw somebody asking for money outside, and he turned to his mother and said, "Can I have some money?" Which she gave him to give to him. He wanted to give money to the homeless guy, and then when he walks in the museum, he says, "Why is he homeless?"
Right.
She looks at me, I look at her, and I think, oh, I just teach people how to do this. You have to live with them. It's not my job. You're the parent. I just have to teach people, And we laugh. But those kind of questions that come, and you might not be ready, but then you've got to be ready. You've got to be able to talk about them. So the experiential questions that happen. So why are people homeless? Well, how much do you go into? Well, it depends on what age level they are.
Right, it's developmental.
Yeah, and then another kind of question is when they wonder about the mystery of God, like that question of your daughter, where does God live? Or the question of a 3-year-old, how come I can't see God? So right. I think to be a non-anxious present to help parents is they've got to be comfortable with their own questions, and they've also, I really think, some practices of faith. Are they doing anything that their own spiritual formation? And we send kids to church school and we take them to choir because we want them to be spiritually formed, but are we doing the same thing for ourselves? Do we have a life of prayer? Do we talk about how our faith is lived in the world with the service that we're doing, the witness of our lives? Do we talk about that? Because they watch us. They know everything we do.
Well, it sounds like, also modeling, around the dinner table, where you get, or when you're out, when you walk by the homeless person, maybe they don't ask the question, but you get into the museum and you say, would you like to talk about that person who that person doesn't have a home? Being able, modeling, asking those kind of questions. I remember one time, of course, I live with, a PhD in theology, and I work in theological education. I remember our son, he was about 10. He said, "Can we talk about anything other than theology?" and Elizabeth and I were like, "How do you do that?" But I'm not sure. We're not experts by any means, but I hear what you're saying is inviting them and giving them space and modeling as pastors or whatever to ask those questions, and would be probably helpful.
There's a great book that came out last year, When Kids Ask Hard Questions.
Okay.
Titled this, and I said, there is a book by that title by Bromley McClanahan and Karen Ware Jackson, and it's faith-filled responses for tough topics. And they talk about and it's an edited book, so there are lots of people writing, but a culture of family conversation. So
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned the dinner table. Is there any kind of ritual repetition that is going
Mm-hmm.
on? Like at the dinner table, like we talked about the examine, where did you see God's love today? Where did you give God's love today?
Mm-hmm.
Or I was doing chapel with the children at Westminster last fall. We have a chapel before they go to church school on Sunday mornings, and thorns, roses, and blossoms, thorns, the difficult part of the day, blossoms are the things you're looking forward to, and the roses, thorns, roses are the good things, and blossoms are things you're looking forward to. And is there any kind of ritual of that you're doing
Right.
that, and the more you do that kind of thing, then that's not just for children, we think it is,
Right.
but it
Right.
really is forming for adults just to think about their day too, and everybody gets to share.
Right.
You
We
know?
in youth group we used to do yums and yucks and highs and lows
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah.
I like that thorn and
Rose.
rose and blossom. I like that. A
Something you're
little more
looking for.
texture. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
There's possibility. I mean, it feels like there's possibility.
Right,
Hmm.
right.
Hmm.
And I mean, so that's a spiritual practice, and I think I'm not sure because parents have so relied on the church to do faith formation for them, so
Right.
because they're afraid to, because I don't know how, they don't want to make a mistake.
Right.
So it's just some simple things you're doing. One family I talked with, and I was teaching last fall at my sister's church, Grace Presbyterian in Tuscaloosa, and I was working with families for a couple of weeks. And this family talked about how their kids would come in, their teenagers, and just unload, middle schoolers, unload. They had so much to unload. It was just like,
Hmm.
I couldn't even, they just had to walk in the door. And the wise parents realized that they just had a lot going on that they needed to unpack. So they had journals, and they were used to journaling.
Hmm.
So they knew they come in, get a snack, get a drink, and they work on their journals,
Hmm.
unpacking the day,
Right.
everything that had happened. And then they're transparent about it. And the
Mhm.
parents then said, we were allowed to read their journals, and then over the dinner table, they could talk about it.
Right. Yeah. This is not some magic. I mean, it's those kind of rituals. I'm thinking, actually, we during this COVID time, we've been doing yoga, and it's a time to kind of center. I mean,
Yes, yes.
whatever kind of works with that child or your family, but to find the rituals. I love the prayer of examine, like, looking back through the day, where did you see God operating, or if they're not ready for that question, just
Right.
what was something that was encouraging, and what was something discouraging. And
Right.
there's so much right now to
Yeah.
debrief. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like the news doesn't stop, and a lot of really scary, discouraging news, unfortunately. And it's those maybe needed more than ever. This is a great time to start, right?
Right. I mean, y'all like to do yoga. I mean, you're right. Families need to find something that they can do together, like if it's walking, or if it's hiking, or
Mm-hmm.
if there's a family that loves to do music together, you can still do music together. You can play your instruments, you can sing, or if there's an art family, or there's a family that's drama. I mean, everybody has seen stuff on Facebook, like with a family that had, God knows where they got all those costumes. Have you seen that one where they dress up in a costume?
Yeah.
I mean, like, who has that many costumes in your house? But that's them, and they love it. I'm thinking about the simple prayer forms. We talk about acts of appropriation, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. But Gelman and Hartman, the rabbi and the Monsignor, talked about thanks, gimme, wow,
Yes.
and oops.
Oops.
Thanks, gimme, wow, and oops. And so, and not to impose stuff, but there's just, what's our thank you prayer today? What's our oops?
Right.
What's our wow? I mean, I just walked in my park this morning. I do an hour walk there, try to do it every other day in my park. And there's so many wow prayers. And,
Right. Yeah.
Thank you prayers.
Right. It's getting close to our time, but I wanted to say one thing, because I know every time I talk about you with anybody else, they talk about how you make the space for learning, create a space that you come into your classroom, especially And I just wonder if you want to say something about that, and maybe that has something to teach us, and maybe even in homes where you're paying attention to what is in the room even,
Sure.
or and I'm sure that's not just physical space that they're talking about, but what is it that informs it's a pedagogy, I guess.
Yeah, it is. So when my baby sister Kathy Hoop was very small, she was born when I was 14 when she was born, and so my mother taught Sunday school, and it was a shared space. So Saturday morning, we'd pack up Kathy, and we would go to her room to turn it into a 3-year-old classroom. And she would get there on Saturday morning to get it ready. And so we'd have the housekeeping center, the book center, the puzzle center, the nature center, the Bible center, and we would set it up. So when I get to McCormick, and I told the registrar I needed to get in my classroom an hour ahead of time. And we were renting at that time classroom space from the Lutheran School of Theology because McCormick only owned one building.
Right.
And we'd moved from the north side, only one. And so she said, well, why do you need that? I said, well, I've got to get my room set up. What do you mean you've got to get your room set up? I said, well, my mother always said, when the first learning begins when the first person walks in the room. She would tell me, no, Lib, when you put the pictures out, remember you're putting them at a 3-year-old eye level, not yours, so make sure they're really low. And she said, you know, you want the room to invite people that something is going to happen here.
Yeah.
So
to inspire the wonder, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so when I was looking at the bare walls, I can't even begin to describe how bare they were, of the bare walls, and I had to do something that would make the room look like something was going to happen here. So cloth works for me. Cloth, always a vase of flowers or a plant. Rearrange the chairs, of course, in honor of Sarah Little, who always rearranged the classroom or used trap tables. Make it look like, so when you walk in, something is going to happen, because if I teach that way, then maybe when educators and pastors go out, they'll think about their space. So when you're preparing for worship in your home and you're doing it on screen, you're preparing a space. So my sister invites, prepare your worship space, a candle, and her church members are doing incredible things, you know, preparing their space and then posting a picture of what they did. Icons on Trinity Sunday. But you have to invite people to think about that. What makes your space sacred?
That is beautiful. I mean, this is the way I feel, and I felt this every week, but maybe especially today, is I want to talk like another hour with you, and I'm sure everybody else does too. But please get to know Elizabeth Caldwell's work. Thank you for this time. Maybe we may have to schedule some more time to do some more conversation. We're just so grateful for you, and looking forward to physically awarding you with the Award for Excellence in Theological Education. That's moved on the docket in the business to 2022, but we're celebrating it right now, and we're so grateful for your witness that continues to influence generations, and just each of your students and those who've been their students. I know I've been influenced. Here I'm at Montreat, and I'm just thinking all the people here around Montreat who taught me some things that I feel like they learned from you. I'm just thinking about right now, and just so grateful for you. And for this time together. I wonder if you could close us with a charge, a benediction. There's faith leaders. I was seeing Hunter Farrell. Who else? Kathy Hoop, your sister, is here. Margaret Ann Crane, Erica Harley, Jack Seymour. There's some of your friends, Dale Jackson. There's many who are out there watching. How would you charge and bless them today?
Sure. We have much work to do in this world. We have much work to do with justice, with mercy, with kindness. We have much work to do in Jewish tradition, tikkun olam, to repair the world. So as my friend Laura Heifetz always reminds me, we do this work together. We're not alone. And I'll close with my sister's favorite benediction, if I can get through it. As she's been doing this every Sunday as she in Zoom worship, and it's her favorite, and she's taught it to me to be my favorite. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. God's mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is God's faithfulness. Go in peace. serve the Lord. Amen.
Amen. Hallelujah. And thank you so much. I just can't thank you enough. We were talking some weeks ago, and I wonder if online you can create those moments, but you just did, where it's a thin place.